Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a great turnout. We're very excited for our event here as part of New York City's Climate Week. So thank you again for joining us. Our event is called the Climate Adaptation Imperative, Frontline Lessons for Global Solutions, and it's co-hosted by the Center for American Progress and the Columbia Climate School. So thank you to everybody who's worked very hard to make this possible. My name is Trevor Higgins. I'm the Senior Vice President for Energy and Environment at the Center for American Progress, where we focus on conservation and climate issues as part of a multi-issue think tank in Washington, D.C. And I'm thrilled to be introducing this event, where we're joined by an excellent panel of experts and advocates to discuss innovative strategies for climate adaptation. From the Netherlands to Bangladesh, the California Bay Area to here locally in New York City, the impacts of climate change are already upon us. All this year we have seen devastation from extreme heat, flooding, and wildfires across the world. These hazards threaten the health and safety of communities throughout the world, and we are on track to exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming, which means that extreme weather and slow onset climate events are expected to continue to get worse. That's why it's all the more important for us to get climate adaptation right. Today, these experts will give us their insights, best practices, and where to look when we want to replicate success. Moderating the panel today is Joanna Lemacchio, Director of Program Design for Climate Action at the Climate School at Columbia University, and Co-Director for the Coastal Resilience and Environmental Justice and Climate Justice Cities Earth Networks. Thank you for moderating today, and we're very excited. We'll pass it off to you after our keynote. Finally, I'm very excited to be introducing Chair Brenda Mallory, who leads the White House Council on Environmental Quality. She'll give our keynote speech today. Chair Mallory advises President Biden on environmental and natural resource issues, policies to improve, preserve, and protect public health and the environment here in the United States, with a particular focus on environmental justice and climate change. In her 2-decade-long career in federal service, Chair Mallory has served in senior positions at the EPA and the White House Council on Environmental Quality, where she's developed NEPA guidance, helped with the Clean Water Act rule, the designation of national monuments and protected areas. Chair Mallory has been a fierce environmental leader, working to protect the nation's natural areas and ensuring the voices of low-income and communities of color are heard. She knows the climate adaptation imperative that we have ahead of us and the importance of climate resilience for our future. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll pass it to you now, Chair Mallory.
Well, thank you, Trevor, and it's really my honor to be here and to have a chance to participate in this conversation, which I think is so important to the work that we're doing and that's going on in the discussions over the course of the week. It's always a great honor for me to have a chance to actually participate in and to listen to discussions of this kind. I sort of feel like I end up kind of popping in and out of many things, and so when there's the luxury to actually have a chance to actually hear from experts who have lived through, whether they planned on being advocates or not, experiences that have brought them to the front lines of really helping to develop policies. That's really a true honor on my part. As Trevor said, throughout this year, we have collectively experienced new extremes here in the United States. The flooding in Vermont upended roads and separated families from loved ones and essential services. The devastating wildfires in Maui tore through crucial infrastructure, with the effects made more severe due to the unique challenges of an island. Extreme weather and excessive heat have been the experience for so many all across the country and the world. As this group undoubtedly knows, 2023 has already set a record for the most billion-dollar natural disasters in a single year. August 2023 also was Earth's hottest August in the 174 years that we've been tracking. These climate impacts have devastating consequences on everything from health of our local communities, from the health of our economies, to the preservation of our cultures. However, as we gather this week in New York in the face of an unprecedented set of challenges, it's important to acknowledge that it's also a critical moment of opportunity, not to bounce back, but to bounce forward. We can build more resilient systems from the community to the national level and beyond. It's time for us to go beyond just coping and adapting to climate change. We really have to transform the way that we approach resilience and how we do business. And what I mean by that is it can't be that we just patch what was broken. We have to rebuild in a way that better protects communities in the future. We have to deliver solutions that better prepare for what's to come. As the federal government, it is imperative that we work across sectors and systems to build resilience to climate change. It's our goal that our work strengthening one community can build resilience for generations to come, not just for a temporary fix. So through the historic investments like the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and CHIPS and Science Act, President Biden has made the largest investment in addressing climate change in US history. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act together dedicate more than $50 billion to advance climate resilience strategies in communities across the nation. On wildfires, we are investing $7 billion to expand the wildland firefighter workforce, remove hazardous fuels from millions of acres of forest, and bring online new technology to better locate and respond to fires. On drought, the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law together include $15.4 billion to enhance drought resilience, including $4.5 billion for drought preparedness and response, which are helping us to tackle the ongoing drought challenges in Arizona, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, and more. On extreme heat, the U.S. Forest Service's Urban and Community Forestry Program just last week announced $1 billion in grants to expand equitable access to trees and green spaces in urban communities, cool city streets, improve air quality, promote food security, and strengthen public health. I joined Secretary Vilsack for this announcement in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, where we also held a roundtable discussion with state and city officials and a broad coalition of community leaders. Following a devastating derecho event in 2020, they lost over 2/3 of the trees in the city. Listening to them describe the work that they have been doing to rebuild the place they call home was a reminder of how debilitating these extreme weather events can be. But it also shows how they have endured while working together to build a better future for their community. So in that room, there was tremendous gratitude for the grant dollars that would be flowing into the community for replacing trees and building a workforce to get the job done. All 385 of those awards are going to disadvantaged communities across the country in all 50 states. This does not simply promote physical activity and get people outside. It cleans the air we breathe, improves mental health, and creates new educational and workforce opportunities. The urban forestry grants are just one example of how our climate resilience investments are also advancing environmental justice. For the first time in our nation's history, the federal government has made the commitment that 40% of the overall benefits of certain federal investments flow to disadvantaged communities that are marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution. That's the President's Justice 40 initiative. These investments are historic, but we are not doing our jobs if this funding does not hit people on the ground and make a real difference in people's lives. I'll give you a few specific examples of some of the work that's underway. We're modernizing building and electric codes to ensure minimum standards for a for safety, health, and general welfare. This will also lower costs for families and businesses and allow us to better protect our buildings through various funding opportunities like HUD's Green and Resilient Retrofit Program. We're implementing the Federal Flood Risk Management Standard, which ensures federally funded projects in areas prone to flooding can boost safety and better prepare for future flood risk. We're implementing climate resilience across the government to ensure each federal agency and their surrounding communities are proactively planning their adaptation. We are using natural ecosystems and other tools available to capture carbon from the atmosphere, reduce climate impacts, and expand access to green and blue spaces. The Department of Agriculture's over $1 billion for urban forestry that I just mentioned is a perfect example of how we are integrating nature-based solutions to combat impacts of climate change. These are all pieces of the bigger picture. We're using a whole of government approach with coordination at federal, state, and local levels to ensure that these projects are done right and in a timely manner. And they all contribute to the resilience and conservation goals of the Biden-Harris administration. President Biden's America the Beautiful initiative established the bold goal of conserving 30% of US lands and waters by 2030. At the United Nations Biodiversity Conference in Montreal, Canada last year, governments across the nation followed our lead and called for global action. The impacts of climate change touch every corner of the globe. Everyone is on the front lines of the climate crisis. Some communities bear the brunt more than others, for sure. So we are taking a holistic approach to ensuring communities disproportionately impacted are front and center in our work, while also understanding that no community is immune to the impacts of climate change. Just like we are working together from one community to another, we must continue to work from one country to another because the climate crisis knows no borders. It's incumbent upon all of us and is part of, I think, what folks in this room are why they're here and how we're connected. Whether we are talking about work in the United States or in Bangladesh or in low-income and marginalized communities that are disproportionately harmed by climate change, we have to join together in our efforts. It is our collective responsibility to transform in the face of change. Thank you for all the work that you are doing, for the commitment that you're making, and for the way that you are tackling these issues in a head-on manner for all the future communities. So I'm grateful to have an opportunity to stay a little bit and hear from the panel and on the various solutions that have been used throughout the world. So thank you so much.
Can you hear me? Great. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Chair Mallory, for your remarks, and for your service, and for helping us sort of contextualize from the federal level what's being done with new and, frankly, transformational funding that's just beginning to close the gap in adaptation, resilience funding, and finance, and delivering that to the local communities. I'm very pleased to be here. I'm Joanna Lavecchio. I'm from the Columbia Climate School, Columbia University, and very excited to moderate this panel. So with that, though, I just want to emphasize, right, that climate adaptation is an increasingly urgent and now problem. This is not a problem of the future or an existential threat. This is the reality and lived experience of communities here in the US, here in New York City, and abroad. And that's a lot of what we'll be talking about today. The panelists who I'm honored to be joined with up here are from communities around the world who are working with frontline communities on the front lines of climate change and can speak to how people are working to safeguard their communities not just in the physical protections, but as Chair Mallory discussed, this is also about culture. This is about livelihoods and jobs. This is about relationships and communities, about health. So all of these are so intersectional, and we'll explore some of those today. Today, our hope is to share knowledge between and amongst experts, and with the audience about the ways that climate resilience can be increased and what lessons we might take from these experiences into our own lives and in our own communities and in our own realities. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce the panelists. I'll briefly introduce you and then feel free to come in. So first, we have Henk Ovink, former First Special Envoy for International Water Affairs of the Netherlands, appointed by the Cabinet of the Netherlands in 2015. He advocates for water awareness and addressing water needs around the world. Second, we have Pamela Pettyjohn, co-founder and president of the Coney Island Beautification Project, where she created the organization following the devastation of Hurricane Sandy here in New York. She works to foster community involvement, resilience, and education to enhance the local environment. We also have Professor Mizan Khan, Deputy Director of International Center for Climate Change and Development and Program Director of Least Developed Countries, University Consortium on Climate Change based in Bangladesh. With 3 books and decades of experience, Professor Khan will be sharing his extensive knowledge of climate change and its impacts in Bangladesh. And last but certainly not least, we have Amelia Fortgang, climate and ocean activist and founder of Bay Area Youth Climate Summit. She is currently a student at Yale University pursuing a degree in ecology and evolutionary biology. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great. So just by way of beginning, and we'll have time with each of you. But this summer, right, we've had a little bit of a taste of the radical reality that adaptation and resilience challenges are facing, and a bit about what lies ahead in terms of climate impacts. Right, we've seen extreme climate impacts from Greece to Libya just recently, this past week, and devastating wildfires in Canada. If you all in New York City, the intersectionality and cross-cutting realities of those impacts were felt even here. Unfortunately, right, these disasters become more common, and with climate science as predicting, less predictable and more variable, which makes these challenges even more difficult. I'm wondering, by way of starting, maybe we can sort of go down the line. Can each of you maybe briefly describe the unique climate hazards that impact your communities, and how your work seeks to increase resilience to some of these risks in light of the climate impact? So I'm wondering, maybe we can start with Professor Khan.
Thank you. Before going to my country, I just want you a few sentences on conceptualizing adaptation. You know, in the convention, adaptation was kind of a forethought. The expression was mentioned about 5 times. But in the Paris Agreement, we have a dedicated article. And in the convention, that was the right reason that mitigation was given the prime focus. Still, as a negotiator for the last 22 years, I continue arguing that mitigation is the ultimate form of adaptation. Because mitigation is not done. So because of certain factors, starting from IPCC assessment reports 3rd and 4th, where I worked as a lead author, and because of climate justice movement, extreme events, adaptation came to the fore. But funding remains extremely weak. That is why, as an academic negotiator, I dedicated myself to writing books and strengthening the conceptualization of adaptation, where I have argued that adaptation should be regarded as a global public good. Because you see, Adam Smith you have heard of Adam Smith, economics students particularly, the theory of the theory of moral sentiment. He wrote this book in 1759, 17 years before his seminal work as the Wealth of Nations in 1776, where he argued that interests are indivisible, both at individual and at national levels. So my interests are bounded with, and you have mentioned first speaker, inaugural speaker, that we are connected. But now we need to walk the talks. Just we continue keeping talking and talking. And in my first book published from Routledge from London and New York, I have mentioned as a negotiator, which should not, I should not have written that climate negotiations are just a process of active inaction, because it's procrastination. Now coming to Bangladesh, also in my book I have mentioned Bangladesh as the ground zero of vulnerability, because of the most densely populated country, living in a small land of 65 times smaller than America, but housing more than half of American population. Given no climate disasters a year, we are sufficient in food. Foreigners cannot think of, because flooding limited is a boon for us. Without that, we cannot survive. Most fertile land on earth, Bangladesh has got one of them. But now we are being raped, we are being devastated every year because of these extreme events all over the world. We are now living in global warming, and the class of human suffering is expanding. But Bangladesh, necessity is the mother of invention. So Bangladesh is kind of a lab for innovations. Bangladesh is regarded for right reasons as a model of disaster management, and now we are trying to move to the further step as a model of adaptation. Why? Because for certain reasons, our government is very, very sensitive. Whole of society is very active in addressing climate change and adaptation is our prime focus. And then our NGOs are also very active. We have one of the highest densities of NGOs in the world. They are doing a good job. And we have Grameen Bank and BRAC, for example, through which our women have been empowered. And I have written a piece 2 years back with the title that women are better husbands than the so-called husbands. As a non-native English speaker, I take the meaning of the word husband coming from husbandry, which means taking care of. So a husband literally means someone who takes care of. But the editor changed the title a little because of the fear that my shoulder might be chopped off, by some section of the people. But nothing was changed. My argument, I have seen in my own family, my mother was a better husband than my father. He was a businessman roaming around, coming back home midnight, but my mother took care. Globally, research shows that $1 earned by a woman, about more than 70-80 cents are spent for household welfare, but not by the husband. So in Bangladesh, women empowerment is happening rapidly. And my suggestion would be to kind of decentralize climate financing and reaching out to the poor, vulnerable women communities who takes care of their family welfare in a better way, and they are contributing a lot to adaptation of this. And my second point is about locally led adaptation. Because for these last decade, adaptation was centralized, and in our societies, the developing countries mostly have a centralized management system. But finally, donors also have come to realize to localize development. America, for example, USAID has decided to provide 25 to 30% of their global aid to local institutions, local government, and that is something that we need to promote, locally led adaptation. This is the solution to me. I will come back, given chance.
We'll have more time, but thank you so much. I wonder if I might turn to Amelia to talk a little bit about the risks that you're encountering in the communities that you work with, and what is the sort of primary driving need that you're seeing to activate about that in communities?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I'll start out by asking you, how many of you had snow days growing up? So in San Francisco, California, we didn't have snow days, but in 7th grade, I had my first smoke day. And I remember that being really terrifying. The wildfires in Sonoma got so bad that the air quality was hazardous. And they canceled school and everyone started wearing masks, and this was way before COVID, so the sight of seeing someone in a mask was just like pretty dystopian and scary. And this was not a one-time event. Year after year, these fires would get worse, they would intensify, they would be even more devastating, and we'd have more days of school canceled. And it got so bad on September 9th, 2020, that I woke up and it was really dark, and I went and I looked outside my window and the sky was bright orange. And I think that was a wake-up call to so many people, and also I remember I was doing my trig homework actually, and I remember looking at the problems and thinking, and looking outside and thinking like there's so many bigger problems to be solving right now than the ones on my worksheet. Let's see, so I then moved to New England to start college. Didn't think I was gonna experience more smoke from wildfires, but lo and behold, this summer, as I'm sure a lot of you experienced, the smoke from Canada started blowing in, and I remember I was at work and I looked outside and it was a really familiar sight. The sky was all hazy, the sun was red, and it smelled really, really strong. And so I think, climate change is impacting us everywhere. And I think one of the most striking conversations I had was 2 weeks after these Canadian wildfires. I had someone come up to me and ask me about why I was passionate about climate change and why this mattered to me. And I told him what I told a lot of you, which was that I had experienced climate change. I had grown up with it, and I felt the imperative to act. And this adult man told me that I was wrong, that climate change was not fueling wildfires, it was just poor forest management. And I was like, great, yeah, right? Great, problem solved, I don't have to care about this anymore, thank you. You have altered my life, career path, what I care about, thank you so much. But I guess on a serious note, I think it emphasized to me the lack of collective understanding we have about the science, and we can't adapt and be more resilient unless we have a strong understanding. And we all need to know that yes, poor forest management is fueling wildfires, but so is climate change. Climate change is making our dry seasons more prolonged, making our fire seasons more extreme. There's less water, exponentially drier vegetation, and that is also fueling wildfires. So I think the key to building resilience and to truly adapting to climate change is really in climate education and building this shared understanding. And so in my work, that looks like I created a youth climate group in the Bay Area called the Bay Area Youth Climate Summit. We've engaged, it's been around 3.5 years now, we've engaged 4,000 youth in summits that bring together youth from all over the Bay Area to learn about and take action on climate change. And we host workshops regularly throughout the year, one of which was literally titled Stewarding Fire-Adapted Ecosystems. And helping to build a shared understanding, because we're going to be the next caretakers, and we are right now the people trying to solve these issues. And so, yeah, we need more knowledge, tools, and resources to do so. And I think what's been really awesome is seeing we've had around 80 people, 80 high school students come through our organizing team in the past few years. And it's been so inspiring to see them find their own leadership abilities that we're all going to need to use in tackling this crisis. And it's been really exciting to see them finally have a seat at the table and be able to talk to other youth and adults alike about their experiences and their opinions on this issue. And I think that's a really critical piece, is both the understanding and including of youth voices in these conversations as we move forward.
Amazing, thank you. I'm hearing a consistent thread about local leadership and decentralized leadership. Leadership where we don't always expect to find it or are conditioned to look for it. Hank, can you tell us a little bit about the risks that you encounter in your work with communities and a little bit about your work and how it shows up in the roles that you play in this work?
Yeah, I'll try. Thanks for sharing these amazing stories already.
The mic's not up.
It is on. It's a dead.
Oh, wait, it might
It's a little bit.
Sorry. Thanks for sharing. And my mother was the activist, just to make sure. She was one of the first female school directors post World War II in the Netherlands. So I learned activism from her. My father was an engineer, so he was on the bright side of life. Engineers think they can always solve everything. Doesn't matter how big a problem is. Luckily, he was a really human-oriented partnership engineer. Both of them, and we joked when I worked for President Obama on this Hurricane Sandy task force. We said, Robert Moses, I think you're familiar, the infrastructure bully, and Jane Jacobs, the community leader, if they had fallen in love and gotten babies, perhaps the world would be a bit better. And this is also a bit where what I learned working across the world and also referencing where we are today. Because the Paris Agreement did something, you could say, like in a negotiation, so 2 degrees. Why? Only later did we estimate with the IPCC the difference between 2 and 1.5. And the promise of 1.5 in the Paris Agreement also was a promise because it was not an agreement, especially because of the global north didn't want to agree on the costs of that difference. But there was no clue on the cost, only that we all thought, wow, it's going to be massive. But we're not yet at 1.5. And what we see happening around the world is that there's an average increase in everything, but the extremes, and this is what research shows and practice shows, the extremes will only become more extreme and more frequent, but it doesn't change the average. And so even if you have a very slow slope of an average increase, with these extremes becoming more extreme, that part of, as you said, adaptation is survival. So the rift that was created also because of Paris and was there before Paris between mitigation and adaptation. Of course, key, without mitigation we die tomorrow, without adaptation we die today, or something like that. And mitigation is key, and we should do everything to keep us under whatever is possible. But without adaptation, that won't see a life in itself. So there's this, you could say, theoretical debate on mitigation and adaptation, while in real life we all suffer. And it doesn't stop at the south or the north. There is really no reason to debate loss and damage in between the both or the 100 billion, but we do, because we find an excuse to not move towards action. And I think this is the stupidity of the world, is that we spend our time in these negotiations instead of the actions. And I think Sharm el-Sheikh, the last COP, was a representation of that. We all knew, we Global North, and I represent the Netherlands, that coming out of Paris and reality, I would say, so there's an agreement, but there's also a real world, that loss and damage and 100 billion are a reality. And they're actually not a problem on the global economic scale, but they're a political problem. So we talked about it for 2 weeks and settled more or less, and we forgot to talk about the whole climate. Second, And that's something I wonder, coming out of Paris, we had an agreement, and now we are in our 8th year of negotiating. Which, if I tell this to a 7-year-old, she would say, you're crazy. You just got an agreement, why don't you implement it? And so it's hard to understand for people in real life that an agreement doesn't lead to implementation, but to more negotiation. So I think here also, that is also why locally led works, because this is where we put things together. I just led the UN 2023 Water Conference. So it literally says United Nations 2023 Water Conference was the second in the history of the UN, the first since 1977 UN conference. And how could you then pair then with the question, is this relevant? Yes, it is also relevant. Talking about global common goods, water should be perceived as a global common good. Why? Freshwater availability is going down the drain because we as humans overuse and abuse that freshwater resource. So our aquifers, which is where water sits in our soil, are depleted. Half of them are past the tipping point, and what we have becomes more polluted. So that means actually the bank that we sit on, which we need for food, energy, climate mitigation and adaptation, resiliency, our economies, cities, infrastructure, we drink away. And then what's left in our rivers and lakes is also becoming more polluted. And less because our glaciers melt. And we see glaciers disappear, so we have less fresh water. And then our poles, north and south, also shrink. So all the fresh water in the world is becoming less and less every second. That is the single resource we depend on. It's a human right, it's not a commodity. And it's felt across the world, but it's not valued at all. So it's managed by history on a very individual scale, personal, family, farm, community, and then you could say river basin, but then you got across borders, it's going more complex, but at least there are models of governance, and that's about it. But right now, because of land degradation, by human activity, deforestation, exacerbated by climate change, we see atmospheric rivers crossing continental borders. So for the first time in humankind, the water cycle, I tend to say is broken, but it's a little bit too popular. It is damaged. And with that water cycle being damaged, undercutting everything. It's undercutting health, equality, talking about women and girls walking the wells, getting raped on the way. Girls can't go to school once a week a month because of their period. There are no hygiene facilities. Devastating water quality, undercutting biodiversity. Our oceans, our wetlands are disappearing at a rate unforeseen. All resiliency matters by nature that could help us build redundancy and resiliency in our system. So that whole freshwater resource that is now transporting and causing water negatives in the Amazon and water positives in the Congo, for instance, has to be dealt with at all scales. Not only the individual and the family and the farm and the river basin and the country and the transboundary, but also the global. And that's why the UN conference was such a way to address this, but also bring all types of coalitions together. And I'll land back on the ground. The conference was not a negotiation, luckily. We were saved for that because the outcome of that would not have saved the world. But it was really about what are really the things that work. And what we saw come forward are now over 800 commitments from local communities, backed up by civil society and private sector partners and governments and finance partners, that at least show the promise what can work. And the immediate response we got was, empty promises. And not because I was responsible for the conference, but I got really angry. Because I would say the majority of these commitments come from people that commit their professional and personal life to get such a commitment going. And the arrogance coming from institutional partners to say, but there is no validation mechanism or evaluation mechanism behind them, really pushes away the commitment of the world to take action in the context of a world that is not willing to take action based on a promise made in 2050. So I really cherish those type of commitments. Then last, my work around the world ranges from Bangladesh and Indonesia and India, the Middle East, chairing water conversations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, in Africa, Afghanistan, Iraq. So I've been in the places where things go wrong. And what I find, and this is the reason why water and adaptations are so linked, what I find is that while everything's devastating and you could really have a hard time getting up every day, which I can imagine, I sometimes do. When you work on water, it's magical. Because it doesn't matter where I am in the world, even in the context of a conflict. Water always sparks the conversation that there is a connection. Because everything is dependent on water and everyone. And that means if you organize these conversations in a way that can help build trust and in a safe space, you literally bring voices together that normally are opposites or fights. And creating the opportunity on a higher level to come together based on these type of insights and an exchange, and then excelling that to an ambition that you could achieve, brings forward solutions that are innovative, but also have ownership. These solutions do not come out of a laboratory or a computer. They also come out of we need the technology, but they're owned by the people in the communities, but also in the financial sector. So I just returned from India, where we implemented one of our smaller scale projects. We captured all the stormwater and the rainwater and the sewage. And this school was the only school in China that wasn't flooded with this massive rain event, but we got it. We treated with bacteria, captured the energy, treated through 2 wetlands on the school square that actually are an amazing playground for the kids, and then recharge the aquifer. And it's monitored online, so we have all the technology and it's scalable and replicable. But the most important thing is that it's owned. And it's owned by the kids and their teachers, the community leader, it's owned by the politicians, but now it's also owned by the financiers and the private sector partners. So all of a sudden there's an opportunity for scale. So it doesn't matter where I am. I come from the Netherlands. We learned German for adaptation strategy, so that is our way to really prepare for the longer term future. At the same time, we also, it's our neighboring country, just the geography. But we also invest heavily in nature and rethink how our river green systems work, and also really rethink how our water balancing model works. Because also in the Netherlands, our engineering efforts were about getting the water out. A country a third below sea level, that was our first priority. Now we learned that with extremes becoming more extreme, is as much important than keeping the water in. So changing this full water cycle in our system, our policies, our legal systems and our investment, but also our infrastructure, only goes through nature. So people in nature, in these locally led coalitions, provide answers that demand scale, buy-in and ownership, and political guts to really move them forward. So, and I had the pleasure to work with many communities around the world that have the guts to move things forward.
Amazing.
Thank you. Was there a question?
Yeah, I might actually just pick up on one of those threads from Hank. No, for you, Pamela. So Hank talked a lot about we've heard a lot actually about locally led adaptation and mobilizing communities. And I wonder if you might help us understand from the perspective of the work in Coney Island about not just some of the risks that the community is facing, but right here in New York City was particularly hard hit by Hurricane Sandy over 10 years ago now. And recently, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers announced a $52 billion project to help protect New York City's coast, including Coney Island, from storm surge. So I wonder if you might help us understand some of the risks at play and also the community's interaction with some of those big projects.
Absolutely. First I want to say, has anyone heard of Coney Island? Anyone here? Excellent. So let me just give you a little background of Coney Island. Coney Island, the first thing you think of is the playground of the world, and that we are. We host millions of visitors every year. So, but there are over 60,000 people that live there all year round, and there's 10,000 new units of housing. That's 10,000 new families moving in. In a peninsula that's only 3 blocks wide, that's it. 3 avenues of egress. So most people that live in Coney Island, they never thought about the environment until they realized that the pollutants that were in the waters in our backyards would end up in our homes and would have devastating, long-lasting effects on our community and on our health. And the answer to the Army Corps of Engineers, we worked with, we're very big on coalitions. We believe in bringing people together and fighting a cause together. There's nothing like standing there and look back and there are people with you when you're trying to fight a cause. And we've been working with the Army Corps of Engineers for 2 years. Southern Brooklyn, Coney Island, had to fight to be included in the Army Corps' plan. Most of the money was going to downtown Manhattan, which we understand. The way the Army Corps looks at which communities are protected and which ones are sacrificed, I would say. It depends on how much the real estate is per square foot, not about the people or the lives of the communities and destroying or which we've seen with Katrina and other devastating emergencies, how people just get kind of moved around all over and never get back to their home. But they didn't look at, the Army Corps of Engineers did not look at the fact, they're looking at an 11-year-old storm with plans for something that happened 11 years ago. Now we've had sea level rise, all these different things that have happened that have changed everything. After every time one of the icebergs melts, the sea level gets higher. Every time that there's any kind of change in the atmosphere, for instance, it seems like all the storms are coming off of West Africa. Actually, New York is we used to just get kind of hit with storms coming off of West Africa. Now we're getting hit with the Gulf of Mexico, they're coming in through Canada, and the first time I've ever really seen Pacific storms hit with such power here in New York. So we are getting hit from all areas. Not only that, the storms are more frequent and they have more intensity. So if you asked me, we're in worse shape than we were during Sandy. If another Sandy hit, we would be even worse off than we were during Sandy. And one of the things that we've noticed with the Army Corps of Engineers, when they plan on, when they finally included South Brooklyn and Coney Island, their answer was to just put up floodgates, just wall the water back. Well, that's not taking into consideration that storm surge is not the only type of flooding. You have, which we've seen, historical rainstorms. You have tidal flooding from rivers and streams. You have water that backs up from the sewer that comes in. You have soil erosion. All these things need to be taken into consideration. And this is just my opinion, but at $52.6 billion, I think that we should be proactive. I think we should look at how things have changed in 11 years and be aggressive in our plan. And I do still believe that the communities that are being affected the most should have a voice in what happens to them. That has been one of the hardest things with all agencies trying to where people who are making plans, they don't include the community and listen to the community. Hank was speaking about, well, I was also at the UN that same week, but I was at the World Forestry Conference. And there was a young lady, she was a student of, I believe she was a student of NYU, and she was native to Alaska. And she had talked about how many people had come to Alaska with their plans and they'd gotten their degrees, they left, and nothing was ever done. And she realized that the people that had the most experience, the stewards, who had 1,000 years of experience, were the indigenous people that lived there all along. But no one wanted to talk to them because he didn't have a degree. Well, I believe the same thing. I believe that my community, they are the experts. They're the ones that can tell you where it's gonna flood, when it's gonna flood, which way the water's gonna flow. And I think that the communities need to be a part of this conversation because they're the ones that have lived experience. They have observed what happens with climate change. And that's where my opinion.
Sometimes people say those who are closest to the problem really know the problem and are therefore closest to the solution. I wonder if I might, how are we doing on time? Pretty good? Okay, great. I might actually turn and pick up on that to Professor Khan. Pamela talked a lot about what we choose to protect and what gets sacrificed along the way, these dilemmas, and also about multiple risks, multiple and related risks, whether those are physical or non-physical. And in your work, sustainable development and poverty reduction are central and also inextricably linked to climate adaptation and resilience. Can you talk to us about some programs or initiatives in Bangladesh that are beginning to tackle some of these issues at the same time and how you approach these types of learnings in community?
Yes, the line of difference between adaptation, the line of difference between adaptation and development is very fuzzy. We argue that if you have good adaptation, it contributes to better development. If you have got environment, climate friendly development, that strengthens your adaptive capacity. So we have to look at both adaptation and development in an integrated way. And in Bangladesh, we are trying to do that. Our NAP has integrated this idea very strongly. Then we have, for example, Bangladesh has got one of the highest social safety nets in the world, one of the biggest social safety nets. And what we are trying to do is to align the social safety nets meant for the poor with the adaptation, strengthening their resilience, their adaptive capacity. Earlier, it went in an isolated fashion. But if we can integrate, for example, about 50,000 crores taka every year, it means about $7 or $8 billion a year we invest in social safety nets. So if this money can be aligned with strengthening adaptive capacity of the most vulnerable communities, focusing on women, then I think we can be a model of adaptation in Bangladesh to sell to the world.
Are there any projects that really inspire you or help illustrate some of that connection? Is there any work being done on the ground that may help bring a story?
Yeah, we, for example, are having a project called Logic, locally led adaptation implemented by the local governments. Our government, we cannot say still very decentralized, but because of civil society pressure and government is trying to understand. So there is kind of a devolution, and we are trying to pressure the government to endorse the 8 sacrosanct principles of locally led adaptation, which are extremely good. If we have those principles and if we can apply, and this Logic, for example, and also there is another project, LOCAT, funded by Germany, and also another project by Holland. This is 21st century, this Delta Plan, 100 years Delta Plan. Bangladesh is a unique country where we have developed this plan with Dutch assistance. So we have a real focus because climate change, extreme events are life and death question for us. So as I mentioned, Bangladesh serves as the lab for adaptation and disaster management. And at our center, always Western students go and do field work and write their master's or MS thesis. I have one suggestion. I spent about 20 years in the Western world, whose society is based on independent selfhood. But our societies are based on interdependent selfhood, where you actualize yourself as a community, not just as an individual. Having best degrees from my daughter, earned a degree from MIT, but now she is earning her huge money. But that is not the purpose of life and everything. So in Bangladesh, through our education system also, we are trying to incorporate these kind of interdependent ideas and selfhood, interdependent selfhood, along with achieving affluence. Okay.
Wonderful. And maybe I might pick up on that, thinking about students and young people. And Amelia, I wonder, you're doing so much work to activate youth and young people. Can you talk a little bit about what the biggest motivators are for young people to get involved in climate action and adaptation, and what all needs to be done to support young people, whether that's education or something else?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start by, again, asking another question of you all, which is, let's see, can you pull out your phone and Google climate change and go to images? And I think a lot of what you're going to see, if you keep scrolling down, are these images that seem pretty strange and dystopian, like burning globes, leaves on fire, polar bears on glaciers, and things that, you don't see on your ride to work or school every morning. And I think a lot of why I've seen youth motivated to tackle climate change is because they view climate change as a people problem, not just a planet problem. And I think a key thing that needs to be done is to reframe this issue as not an issue of burning leaves and globes or the dry cracked earth or whatever images you're seeing online right now. But it should instead be showing images of, how Hurricane Sandy has impacted people, how the campfire in Paradise, California has made people lose homes. And I think the youth that I know, and myself included, are incredibly motivated to tackle climate change because it intersects with everything. And I think you can't care about anything without caring about climate change. You can't care about housing, about social justice, about healthcare, or even about spending time outdoors if you don't also care about climate change. And as for what needs to be done, I think a really good metaphor that could address this question is about planting trees. So trees are this awesome example of both mitigation and adaptation. So they sequester huge amounts of carbon, and they also, with the urban heat island effect and these heat waves that are increasing in frequency and intensity, in peak temperature events, areas under shaded trees can actually be 20 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit cooler than unshaded areas. And so trees are awesome. And I'm also going to bring in a more personal anecdote, which is that this will seem a little random at first, but my grandmother was an elementary school art teacher. And one day she decided to plant a coast redwood tree with her 5th grade class. And the students were really skeptical. They were asking, why are you planting this tree if we're never going to benefit from its shade? We're going to be leaving this elementary school really soon. I don't really understand why we're doing this. And she told them, this was now probably 50 years ago, that it's not for you, it's for the students that are going to come after you. And I, unfortunately, never had the chance to meet my grandmother. But I was lucky enough to attend the same elementary school where I walked by that tree, which is now 40 feet tall every single day. And I think planting trees serves as a great metaphor for what youth are calling for with climate change, where we need to plant these trees, literally and figuratively, for future generations. And so planting these trees looks like, well, literally planting trees, as Chair Mallory was saying, with the 1 billion for urban forestry, but also restoring coastal wetlands to make communities like mine more resilient against sea level rise and flooding. It would be building cooling centers and combating the risks of severe air quality and pollutants. And young people are going to be the next stewards of these trees. And we're asking our leaders to help plant these trees with us. And I think the role that young people play right now is really awesome, because we're starting to be the stewards of these trees by getting really involved in climate education and literacy, moving the needle on lots of climate policy issues, even, this is a more literal example, but green jobs training programs, and preparing to be literally the next stewards of these trees. And so I think young people are calling on our leaders to really include us in these discussions, because the science says that we are going to be dealing with warming long after we reach net zero. We're going to be dealing with these consequences for probably longer than the rest of our lives. And so we really want to work together with everyone to solve them, and we want to collaborate with other people to plant the trees so that we can steward them.
Thank you.
Just wanted to add.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add a little something to what you just said. I agree with her. When we looked at climate change, we had to look at it holistically, not just the water, but also green urban forestry. I just wanted to say that retired Deputy Commissioner Liam Kavanaugh is here, and he started the initiative in New York, which is now called Forest for All NYC, and we have gotten all 5 boroughs to commit to planting 1 million more trees here in New York, because we understand that you just can't look at the water. You have to think about clean air and heat mitigation. So thank you.
Wonderful. And maybe I'll ask one more question. And this is sort of, I think it's for Hank and for you, Pamela, also. But I think what we're starting to also get into in this conversation is when we know the solutions, such as planting trees, but then there's how you make the decision, right? So I think in Hank's case, right, in learning from the Netherlands experience with flood and water, and specifically about the relationship between urban planning and the built environment, what types of lessons learned or what types of approaches do you use to support decision-making in the policies and design spaces? And then I think also, Pamela, maybe you might follow up and help us articulate this question at the local level, and what local communities can do to start to support decision makers and place them in positions of power.
Well, make sure you elect the right decision makers. It's helpful, for sure. But it's not enough. And I think in my work, but also looking 900 years back in the Netherlands, where the Netherlands was not a country, but a bunch of city-states, water was already governed. So it's an interesting inspiration. We had locally led governing authorities where taxes were paid and that were run by a collaborative of voices. So there was literally, we call it also a table, where the farmer, the more or less mayor, the official of the city, the business people, community people, individuals would sit around and discuss both water quality and water safety and make decisions on where that money went. Why? Because it was very clear in such a vulnerable place as the Netherlands was and still is, that you can only make a decision together. Because if you do it one by one, you have defaulting solutions. Because you can build a wall around your house, but then the water goes to your neighbor, so you have a fight. Not a good idea. If you do it together, you have a fight with the group of neighbors. Also not a good idea. So you understanding that collaborative effort across different interests could provide decisions towards solutions that helped is very old. Of course, it was very small scale. At a certain point, we had close to 3,000, and then it's very small. If you look at New York, you look at the Netherlands, and so more. And so we're a very small country. And so at that time, we were less dense. Now we are 18 million, scale of New Jersey, something like that. And it's like, but the fact that collaborative effort institutionalized, first in a very small scale, and they got merged and became more effective. When we became a country and we drafted our constitution in 1848, water became the fourth layer of government. So we literally have 4 layers of government, including elections. City, we call it province, but you call it state here, so city, province, national, and water. Every 4 years we elect officials that take care of water safety and water quality. And I'm not saying that that is the solution, because every culture, every country has different ways. I'm also not promoting to have 4 layers in all governments around the world, or that's not what I'm saying, but the background of this, or the backdrop of this, is that it's about finding the opportunity to both informally and institutionally strengthen collaboration across the differences in such a way that you can build trust in a world that is, distrustful. When I worked for President Obama's Hurricane Sandy task force here in New York, we had the same as what Pamela said, is that post the disaster, and this is around the world the same, we look back to what we lost, which is logical, especially when you lose your daughter or your house or your business. You don't want to look ahead. You don't want to listen to a scientist or a policymaker or a mayor or a community activist or a youth to say, oh, the future. You want your daughter back. There's in that future, your daughter is not there. So you can't blame a person or a family that lost like real people in such a close environment to not have the capacity to look ahead. But it's the responsibility of others to create an environment where you can look ahead. And that's exactly what we did post-Hurricane Sandy by saying, provoking Congress that actually said you can only provide dollars by looking back, building back. I went with the Army Corps through the region and they were building back walls, and I said, what are you doing? And they took the drawings, and the drawings were from 1991 or something, and Hurricane Sandy was in 2012. So the situation was a little bit different. So that is literally around the world. It's not a blame game. This is around the world. We build back what we lose. Germany and Europe, 3 years ago, we had this massive flood. And a disaster like that shows, like an X-ray, our vulnerability in our community, but also in our infrastructure. If you build back that, forget it. It's not prepping your community, your economies, your society for the future. So science is key, longer term planning is key, the money that comes with it, the governance that are key, and the collaborative approach. So what we did post-Hurricane Sandy, creating with Rebuild by Design, a safe space where we brought communities, Occupy Sandy, Governor Christie, everyone. You need everyone at the table, the ones that disagree, especially the ones that disagree, to start to build an understanding what you could do, and then raise the ambition what you could even do better in the context, knowing that it's science informed, and the better you can be there, the more hopeful it is also, because you really can provoke. And it's not easy, because not everybody will be happy. Michael Kimmelman, who's a New York Times journalist, he wrote an excellent piece on the Lower East Side park that's being built in protecting part of Manhattan. And he explains clearly that there are no silver bullets that will solve and bring salvation for everyone, and it's only paradise. But also he explains clearly that it's necessary to focus on resiliency and adaptation measures that consider this common good, knowing that on the individual level it will be tougher. And because it's tougher on the individual level, this collaborative process is key so everybody understands. Last, 1995, seems like a long time ago, but we almost flooded. And it was the rain events in Germany, in Switzerland, and the ice melt, and in France. So all our dams, dikes, and levees were like on this and overflowing with. So we evacuated 250,000 people. And in the Netherlands, it's quite a bit. In Bangladesh and India, we evacuated 1 million people or more, but we have less people. So for us, it was quite a wake-up. And we were thinking about our riverine system in the protection. So we decided to say we have to rethink our infrastructure. We give it back to the river, because that is our natural protection system in the context of both floods and droughts and environmental quality. So we came up with a program now called Room for the River. And literally also taking not only land, but also people out of harm's way. And the law that we created for that was based on 2 principles in the law. One was safety and security, but the other was quality. Quality for the environment, social quality, but also quality of the process. So by law, we were not only entitled, but we needed, as a government, to bring everyone to the table, which was very culturally normal, but we institutionalized that cultural capacity to make sure that across all layers we delivered. It was a national program, but it was implemented from the ground up. And one example there was that there was a piece of land in the middle of this delta where farmers were having their farms, and our Dutch Army Corps of Engineers said, we have to get them out because we need it for calamity storage. So we funded the farmers and an NGO to come up with an alternative plan. And they came up with an alternative plan saying, we want to stay. And they're still there. So we implemented the alternative plan they come up with. Why? Because it totally outperformed the idea of just moving them out, which was a simple solution to a very complex problem. Just as an illustration that this type of collaborations bring those safe spaces in the context of an institutional world, like with President Obama's task force, the 60 billion of investment, really helps us provoke our first line of understanding what needs to be done, and helps us change that to a higher level and convince decision makers that it is possible across the aisle here in the US, but also across the many aisles we have in the world. So I believe that type of approaches are key, that we have to provoke them. That's what I've been trying post and pre-disaster, by bringing as many voices to the table, and it's not always successful. And it goes with many bumps, and there's ups and downs, and probably more downs than ups. But there's also results that work, and that show that what needs to be done literally can be done. So, and I think that's where the optimism still comes from.
Great. I'll let Pamela answer about decision making, and then we'll do it round to round.
Okay, I'll make this really quick.
What's that? Oh, just wrap up?
No round robin after.
Okay.
Oh, got it. No problem.
Okay, I've been very fortunate to work with Hank for the last 9 years, and part of that collaboration and working with him was to look at the devastation of Sandy and realize this was an opportunity to rebuild, but do better. Look at what went wrong and make sure it doesn't happen again. And Hank, of course, you can hear he works on the policy end, getting the White House to see that we can do a better job. But my part was talking to the communities, trying to get people to understand that there was something that we could do, explaining it, what they call like unpacking the black box, making complicated issues simple so people can understand. I still believe that we the people. I think that that's where our strength is. And when people understand, and we understand that people have other things on their mind, everyday problems, whether they're going to be able to eat or buy medication. We understand that. Our job is, and that includes everyone in this room, especially the students, is to make this a personal message. Why should I care? Why should I care? Why should I be involved? Make it a kitchen table conversation. And what I mean by a real quick example, we have elementary school kids come out, they do a cleanup on the shorefront. And you wanna know where all this plastic comes from. Well, we tell them about microplastic and what happens and how the microplastics are being eaten by the fish and so on. They go home, they tell their parents. Now here was a parent that was worried about something else, that now is concerned about plastic being in the fish because the mother is serving it to her family. Now she wants to know, what do I do? How do I change this? And that's how you start these conversations. You reach people where they are and you let them know why is this important to you and why you need to do something now. And that's what Coney Island Beautification Project has been doing all along. Thank you.
It's a wonderful note to leave us on as an ask to everyone who's here is to make the message personal, meet people where they are, and it's really the path to solutions that are locally led, right? And in resonant and relevant with communities as we think about adaptation and resilience. So I hope you'll join me in thanking our amazing panelists. For American Progress and Chair Mallory for being with us today, and look forward to talking about it with you all after the panel. Thank you.